Something truly terrifying is brewing for Russia. On August 25, right after the United States military plane with CIA Director John Ratcliffe on board took off from Moscow, Vladimir Putin immediately signed 6 decrees but published only 3. It later emerged that Putin signed 3 secret decrees after Western media reported that the CIA director had arrived in Moscow to warn Vladimir Putin about the consequences if Russia actually attacks Europe. And the first signs of preparation for such a war have already appeared. According to intelligence data, Russian military conducted mobilization preparation exercises in the Kaliningrad region, as well as in other regions, checking the Ministry of Defense infrastructure for readiness to receive new recruits, to provide them with food and weapons. In addition, US intelligence has received information that Vladimir Putin may try to test the strength of the North Atlantic Alliance. And then suddenly, 3 classified decrees come out at once, and the White House, I'll put it this way, remains silent about the results of the CIA director's talks with Putin. And against this backdrop, the Russian Sberbank conducted calculations and unexpectedly but publicly came to the conclusion that the scenario in which Russia wins the war has only a 7% chance. And at the same time, Armenia announced that it would not prevent Russians who tried to flee from Russia to Armenia in the event of a new wave of mobilization in the Russian Federation, and is ready to provide them with assistance. Let's analyze what the secret decrees of Vladimir Putin signed late at night after John Ratcliffe left Moscow might mean, and what alarming picture is painted by several parallel developments at once. My name is Alexey Pechi, let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like and write any comment you want. So let's start right away with Vladimir Putin's decrees themselves. Russian President Putin signed 3 classified decrees amid the unexpected and unannounced visit to Moscow by the head of the United States Central Intelligence Agency, John Ratcliffe. This is evidenced by the Russian Federation's legal information portal. According to the data from this government portal, on August 25, Vladimir Putin signed 3 public decrees that were published. Numbers 608, 609, and 610. 2 of them concern the replacement of the Russian ambassador to Iraq, and another one changes the composition of the Commission on Disability and Veterans Affairs. At the same time, the last published decree of Vladimir Putin, signed on the eve of August 24, is numbered 604, and its content, by the way, is also already known. It allows the state to take under so-called temporary administration, and essentially to confiscate almost any properties and enterprises if the rulers have not provided proper protection against drone strikes. So literally a day before the CIA director's visit, the Kremlin expanded its right to effectively nationalize any business in Russia under the pretext of insufficient protection against Ukrainian drones. Well, the next 3 decrees are somehow completely hidden from the public. So once again, on the official portal we have Decree 604, and then immediately 608, 609 and 610. 3 are clearly classified, and that's when the theory started about what might be hidden in them. Let me remind you of the context of the CIA director's visit to Moscow, so the connection is clear. During his visit to Moscow, the first since the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the head of the CIA met with Vladimir Putin. For this, the president of Russia even cancelled one of the events that hundreds of people had been preparing for. This was officially reported by Kremlin pool correspondent Alexander Yunashov, and it is obvious that such a correspondent only says what the Kremlin allows him to say. That is, the statement that Putin postponed all his plans for the sake of meeting with the CIA director is a message from the Kremlin itself. What exactly was the topic of the negotiations between Putin and Ratcliffe remains unclear. And now the Wall Street Journal writes that Ratcliffe may have brought Putin a warning based on American intelligence data, which showed that the Kremlin is preparing a new round of mobilization and a possible provocation against NATO. In particular, NATO detected that the Russians were actively rehearsing a mass mobilization exercise scenario in the Kaliningrad region, the Russian enclave in Europe, and that similar exercises took place in many regions of Russia. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation was checking how ready the training grounds were for the mass intake of new recruits. At the same time as Radcliffe, by the way, the Vatican's Secretary for International Relations, Paul Richard Gallagher, was also in Moscow. He held talks with Sergei Lavrov and stated his readiness, quote, to use all tools to facilitate a settlement in Ukraine. So basically, you see, the US acted as follows. Radcliffe warned that Moscow should not escalate, and the Vatican representative immediately proposed a peace plan developed by Ukraine, the US, and Europe. At the same time, the Secretary of the Armenian Security Council, Alen Simonian, made a public statement that Armenia will not prevent Russians who try to leave Russia for Armenia. In the event of a new wave of mobilization, Armenia is ready to help them. Here is his quote. No one at the border is going to ask anyone why they came here. To any Russian, I can only say one thing. Welcome to Armenia. Here we love everyone, we respect everyone, and they will find everything they were looking for when they came to Armenia, and they can return to Russia whenever it is convenient for them. The official also noted that the Armenian authorities will not only not prevent Russians from entering, but will also provide assistance to Russian citizens subject to military service if necessary. The statement was not made without reason. As I mentioned earlier, the Russian military has already begun checking the region's readiness for the draft. Sources in the US administration have suggested that a new wave of mobilization is possible. It may start after the September elections to the State Duma, and it could include Russians with minimal military experience and those who have no desire to fight at all. European officials, in turn, link the possible mobilization to the heavy losses suffered by the Russian army. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, by July 2026, the losses of the armed forces of the Russian Federation exceeded 1.4 million people were killed and wounded, and the rate of recruitment of volunteers no longer covered the losses. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky, by the way, previously claimed that in the fall Russia could mobilize from 300,000 to 500,000 people due to an acute shortage of manpower. Well, in Russia itself, cases of covert mobilization are being recorded more and more often. Over the past month and a half, residents of at least 17 regions have complained about being forcibly detained and pressured to sign a contract with the Ministry of Defense. And finally, I'll mention the last and most unexpected element of today's picture. This is an internal document that sheds light on how the situation is being assessed within the Kremlin's inner circle. Analysts from Russia's Sberbank prepared a memo titled Scenarios for Achieving Peace in the Russia-Ukraine Conflict, allegedly obtained from the correspondence of the bank's head, German Gref, and evaluated 8 possible scenarios for ending Russia's war against Ukraine. Even in the Russian Sberbank, the chance of a decisive military victory for Russia was estimated at only 7%. And that's with a time frame of 12 to 24 months. And for such a victory, according to the calculations of Russian analysts themselves, it would require the mobilization of those same 500,000 people, an increase in the production of aerial bombs, and strengthening of air defense. And a breakthrough in creating autonomous drone swarms capable of coordinating with the help of artificial intelligence without operators. The memo directly acknowledges the scale of internal problems. The budget deficit of the Russian Federation for the first quarter amounted to 4.6 trillion rubles, with an annual plan of 3.8 for defense. The key interest rate is 15%, and oil and gas revenues have fallen by 45%. The defense industry is short by about 400,000 workers, and there is a shortage of microelectronics, ammunition, and engines. Russia has lost up to 35 air defense components, and the military losses are estimated at an average of 30,000 people per month. These are killed and wounded. At the same time, about 90% of new contract soldiers are simply used to make up for these same losses. The most likely scenario, according to Russian analysts from Sberbank, is the Trump deal. 32% probability with a horizon of 6 to 12 months. According to this scenario, Trump will push for an agreement by the US midterm elections in November. The war is frozen along the current front line, some sanctions are lifted, and Ukraine's entry into NATO remains blocked. In second place is the so-called Korean-style freeze at 22%. Large-scale hostilities cease without a formal peace treaty. The front stabilizes, but legally the war continues. Drone warfare persists at a low level. Together, these two scenarios add up to a total probability of 54. So, in the Kremlin itself, judging by this leak, they consider a freeze to be the most realistic scenario, not some kind of Russian victory. Once again, Sberbank of Russia estimates the probability of Russian victory at 7%. At the same time, analysts directly point out that the most favorable negotiation window for Russia is right now, and after that by the end of the year and beyond. Moscow's position may worsen due to liquidity depletion. Part of the National Wealth Fund, which amounts to about 4 trillion rubles, with a withdrawal rate of roughly 400 billion rubles per quarter. Judging by the conclusions, write in the comments about a realistic freeze, not the channel.
Три засекреченных указа. Здесь поставлю многоточие, ваше мнение, ваши выводы пишите в комментариях под этим выпуском, подписывайтесь на канал.
Click victory, judging by the realistic one, not that victory.